Hey, what is up guys? It's Stan here back with another video. So I'm not gonna lie, this kind of feels like deja vu because behind me is a 38-inch LG Ultrawide panel. Now, several months ago, I actually picked up the 38GL950G from LG, did a whole review of it, and for one reason or another, I actually sent it back and decided to wait for the Acer X38 panel. But long story short, that never came to the United States and I got tired of waiting, so I actually picked up the 38GN950G, the updated model, the newer one from LG, which is behind me right now. So I'll do a full review of this panel, talked about the differences, similarities, and my thoughts on this panel. So let's get into it. Now, both 38-inch panels are actually very similar. In fact, the only major difference between them is that one has the GSync module and one does not. The GL version has the GSync chip inside of it, while the GN is a FreeSync Pro panel with GSync capabilities. Because one has the GSync module and one doesn't, there are also small differences that we'll talk about. So the first difference on the back of the panel, the actual panel itself, the display is the same, but on the back side, the I/O ports are a little bit different, meaning the G-Sync version has a single HDMI and a single display port, while the GN, which I got right here, has two HDMI and one display port. The build quality of the actual panel with the sphere LEDs, identical, great. The LEDs are bright. You can easily configure it with a little spinning wheel on the bottom of the screen or using the software to control the Sphere 2.0 lighting. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. If you want to check out more, you can check out the review of the other panel. I'll make sure to link it in the description down below. Now, the stand is actually one of the major differences between the two models. One of the major criticisms I had with the GL950G was that the stand was way too flimsy for the size and it was just not stable enough and there was a lot of wobble in it. It looks like LG took the criticism and improved the stand design because this stand is much beefier than the other one. It's much thicker. It's still made out of plastic, but it's quite a bit sturdier and it's got two screws on the bottom with the height adjusting mechanism quite a bit better. That said, since I already have a monitor arm I actually picked up for the other monitor, I just mounted it on the monitor arm. It's an Amazon Basics Ergotron monitor arm. If you want to check that out, again, description below, I'll make sure to link it. But as you can see, the monitor floats there. It's really cool, effect. Actually, the monitor arm is perfect for this monitor. So other major differences. The GN FreeSync version has a maximum refresh rate of 160 Hertz, while the G-Sync version has a maximum refresh rate of 175 Hertz. Realistically though, because of the bandwidth limitations, both monitors you really only want to run at 160 Hertz because of the bandwidth limitations. And what I mean by that is, in order to run at the 175 overclocked speed, you had to decrease the color to 422 chroma subsampling, which causes some fringing and purpling of the text, making it very difficult to read. So since there was that limitation already, that 160 Hertz limit seemed to be at the sweet spot for these two monitors anyway. And when you run at 160 Hertz, you can run at 8-bit color depth and still have a very good gaming experience. Now, if you want to run at the full 10-bit, which this panel is rated up to, you have to drop all the way down to about 120 Hertz, which is a pretty big decrease from that 160. So between 8 and 10 bits, my opinion is that you really can't tell the difference between 8 and 10. So you might as well run at 8-bit with 160 frames per second, and is probably the best way to go, which basically is the default rated speed of this monitor. So next I want to talk about the variable refresh experience with this panel. But before that, I want to talk about a little bit of the background. So The Nvidia G-Sync module is actually capable of doing a variable refresh from 1 frame all the way up to maximum frames, 175 in the case of the GL950G. When you drop below a certain threshold, the G-Sync module just starts displaying the same frame over and over again to keep the refresh rate high, but even though it's showing the exact same thing. Now, for FreeSync Pro panels, they also have the capability of doing low frame rate compensation, effectively showing the same frame so that it keeps the refresh rate high. That way it doesn't get dim or whatever, just to keep the panel refreshing at a constant rate. So Nvidia claims that this panel, according to their G-Sync website, this panel has a variable refresh rate on Nvidia GPUs from 48 frames all the way up to 160 frames. But also, AMD claims that this is a a low frame rate compensation enabled display. So what is really going on here? Well, behind me you can see the famous Nvidia Pendulum demo here, and I've got the frame rate oscillating between 35 frames and 50 frames, basically crossing through that 48 frame limitation. And what you'll see is that basically there are no tearing of the picture. There is a little bit of stuttering just because you're dropping so low on FPS, but there isn't any of tearing effect. So basically what I'm trying to say is, even though there's a variable refresh rate, according to Nvidia, from 48 to 160, it does look like low frame rate compensation is being properly applied on the Nvidia GPU with this panel. So effectively, the G-Sync experience is going to be pretty similar to that of the actual G-Sync module, even below 48 frames per second, at least in my experience. Now, because it doesn't have a G-Sync module, you are losing out on a couple features, such as variable overdrive, which, because it doesn't have a G-Sync module, you're not going to get that variable overdrive feature. And also, it looks like there are no FPS monitors or OSDs in this panel like you get on the GL version. So you're not going to get that FPS, hardware FPS monitor indicator. I guess that the G-Sync module handled all that, and because it doesn't have the G-Sync module, you don't have that option anymore. All in all, if you want to have that FreeSync Pro experience and the capability of running G-Sync compatible on this monitor, this is probably the best of both worlds, especially considering the price of this monitor. It's important to note that the 38GL950G's G-Sync version does allow you to run FreeSync, but I'm not sure if you're getting all the FreeSync Pro capabilities out of that monitor. So there is a little knowledge gap there. But to be safe, this is going to be able to allow you to do both. Now online, I've read a lot of people complaining about the 38-inch G-Sync module's fan making noises. Personally, when I had it, I hadn't really had any issues with it. Maybe I just had a good version, or maybe some of the fans are going bad inside it. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate, but I can definitely say that this 38GN950G does not have a fan, so it's going to be silent. And there's no coil whine. I mean, it's basically what you would expect from a monitor. Monitors really shouldn't be making any sound, especially if it doesn't even have any speakers, right? Now I want to talk about why I decided to purchase this monitor over all the competitor monitors out on the market. So if you recall, I've been using a 32-inch 4K monitor for the best part of 4 or 5 years. And the reason why I wanted the 32 inch is because of the real estate, the vertical height. It's very good for reading web pages or doing productivity spreadsheets, especially given that vertical distance. The main reason why I hadn't went over to ultrawides is because ultrawides, 34-inch ultrawides have a vertical pixel height of 1440 pixels. Basically, it's the same height as 27-inch panels. The 38-inch LG panels are the first panels to have more than 1440 pixels. So this is 1600 pixels by 3840 pixels. That 1600 pixels is getting closer to that 4K's 2160. So you get that little bit extra height in there. And for me, that was the major difference. There are really nice alternative panels if vertical height's not your thing or it's not important for you. For example, the Samsung G9, on paper, that looks like a beast of a monitor. But it's 5120, I think it's 5120 by 1440, essentially two 27-inch panels right side by side. And that 1440 vertical pixels, it was just not enough for me, especially when you're doing video editing or spreadsheets or even websites. You kind of feel it in that vertical distance. In fact, I know that this has more surface area than my 32-inch, but looking at it, I feel like this is actually smaller just because I'm losing out vertical height even compared to my 32-inch, even though I know it's more expansive than the old one. It's kind of hard to explain, but I think you hopefully you get the idea that, to me, that vertical height is really important. All right, to talk about the viewing experience on this panel. Now, I'm not an official panel reviewer, but to me, the colors are vibrant. The brightness is good. If you want to have an in-depth review, I recommend taking a look at the TFT Central review of the 38GL950G because the panels are exactly the same. The accuracy, according to them, is actually very good. So I would imagine basically this is exactly the same as that. Now, one thing I did notice was that on a completely white background, you do have a little bit of vignetting. So ever so slightly towards the bottom here, you get a little bit of darker, and maybe ever so slightly in the corners up here, you get a little bit darker. The uniformity, color uniformity, drops off just a little bit towards the edges. There's no visible backlight bleed. It's just actually just a little bit darker. So it's not that visible or it's not that distracting to be. So it's pretty good. The curve is nice. The curve is pretty gentle of a curve. I think you're still able to do pretty good video editing or productivity even with that curve in there. It's not like it's that 1000R G9 curve that's pretty pretty insane, but the curve is pretty good. All right, so this is a test of the local dimming zones. This panel is rated for HDR 600 content. 600 being a little bit better than the HDR 400 rating, but realistically, this panel is not really known for the HDR content. By definition of HDR 600, this panel has to have some kind of local dimming capability, and this panel does have edge-lit local dimming capabilities, but realistically, you're talking about only 8 or so zones in this panel. And since this panel is so big, you got basically big chunks of this panel lining up and dimming. So this setting right here is local dimming completely on, when 100% on. And what you'll see is as the circle and square moves through the panel, across the panel, you have the different zones lighting up and going dim. The camera is slightly overexposed to show you guys what I'm talking about. Realistically, viewing it in a bright room, you can't really tell that much, but if you're in a dark room, then it becomes a little bit more apparent. Honestly, I leave the local dimming zones either in auto or off. It seems like there is a algorithm in there to try to cut down on the distracting local dimming zones or the haloing. So auto is pretty good, but most of the time I think I just leave it off because realistically you're not buying this panel for HDR content. HDR 600 is so-so, it's not even that great. And if you really want HDR content, you really need a panel that has full array local dimming, which this panel isn't. And you need something like a HDR 1000 for that kind of content. So understanding that it's got limitations in HDR capabilities and that the local dimming is kind of limited, I don't think you'll be disappointed in all the other aspects of this panel if you understand that there are limitations to what this panel can do. Overall, if you're looking for an ultra-wide in the 34-inch plus range, there are only a handful of panels to choose from. And I think that either the 38GL950G or the 38GN950G are very good panels for you to consider. And if you're looking for vertical height, this is the one to get because, or this and the other one, 38-inch, is the one to get because you get that little extra bit of pixels on the top and bottom. GSync works, adaptive sync works, FreeSync works. The colors are good, vibrant, and you get a relatively high refresh rate of 160 frames per second with this panel. So last thing to talk about is the price. This is, again, going to be a little bit cheaper than the GSync version of the panel. I actually picked this up at Costco, of all places. If you go to the Costco's website, at least currently, there is almost like a $200 manufacturer's rebate. So MSRP, I think they're listed for $1,600, but I actually picked this up for like $1,400. That's kind of why I ended up rebuying this, even though I was waiting for the X38 Predator panel. I just kind of threw in the towel. I was like, heck, this thing's on sale. I might as well get it. So yeah, I'll make sure to link the monitor and the monitor arm in the description down below. And if I can find that Costco link, I'll throw that down there as well for you guys to compare the prices. Overall, this is a solid monitor, and that's basically why I'm most likely going to be keeping this one. And, it's a pleasant surprise that it works so well, especially with a G-Sync compatible. And, everything, basically no complaints. In any case, if you have any questions, you can ask them down below, and I'll try to answer them as they come in. If this video helped you in your purchasing decision, you can hit that like button. That'd be great. It really helps out with the YouTube algorithm. And consider subscribing if you want to see more tech videos. I'll see you guys in the next one.